started meeting just around the industry, being in New York City, a couple of events. We've been able to like hang out and actually have a good time together at some of these events more recently, which is awesome. But I would love for you to introduce yourself to the industry, to the audience. Tell us a little bit about what you do, um, tell us about who you are.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I am sort of a reform consultant. Currently, I run a company called MWBE Unite. We are a network of diverse alliance members that's focused on moving the needle around diversity in commercial real estate. So we feature all different types of services throughout the real estate life cycle. And we help to sort of complement teams and sort of pitch for business at scale. So, yeah.
I know that we talked a little bit about this topic of healthy as it relates to commercial real estate, and you really get to see a lot of the life cycle. You get to see a lot of the parts and pieces of that living asset, just kind of like I do from like a bigger scale. We get to see a lot of the little pieces versus playing in one particular niche. And so when I say healthy as it relates to the real estate industry, what is the most kind of striking part in the scheme of what you do?
So it's interesting, when you say healthy, it brings me back to my roots. Very few people know that I started my career in a large hospital in Chicago.
All right.
So I have a healthcare background, both in planning and project management. But when you kind of play it forward, through the years, the training that I bring to the table was really very much environmental psychology based. And so from a healthy person perspective, it's both the individual, like physical health, but it's also the psychological health around how people experience the space. And I think that those two aspects of my sort of roots and training is important to this conversation, because as we kind of think about where things are now post COVID, right, where everybody's trying to figure out, like where to go from here. I think well-being is top of mind, belonging is top of mind, and inclusion is top of mind. So those are some of the areas that I would lean into when we think about healthy at the organizational level and at the individual level.
So, did you say environmental psychology?
Yeah.
So interesting. And that is so applicable to obviously this conversation, but just what an asset to the industry to be able to see things from that kind of lens. What are some of the things that you think have changed kind of more significantly, the things that you're seeing more of right now as a result of obviously people being back in the office, which is, something gets talked about a lot, but you have a very unique perspective and point of view and kind of role. So what are you seeing?
So I think the industry is struggling with overall how to create that sense of well-being. Because we are in the widget business, we're in the service business. And the task at hand has always been about how do you create more spaces? How do you create more amenities? How do you surround some services to make it enticing for people to want to come back? But, going back to that psychology, terminology, people are struggling with issues that are an extension, not only the space, but the organizational priorities that companies are going through. And if you look at, sort of the studies that are out there, in February, Forbes, had a study around well-being in the workplace. And the stats are, unfortunately not encouraging, right? So they're talking about, 86% of the people that responded to the survey actually feel that organizations need to do more around mental health needs in the workplace, whether that's resulting from burnout or from wage stagnation or from just, management practices that, frankly, the leaders in these companies are also struggling with as well, right? So I think we've got challenges there. I think that, when we start to look at hybrid introduced a different way for people to work. We had norms of being work from home for several years. And then, all of a sudden, I got to get on a different schedule. I have to have a different pattern with my family members. Yeah, I have different logistics. And then sometimes, depending on how well coordinated the company is, people feel lonely even when they come into the office because you can't plan everything where the right people are at the right places at the right time. So it becomes a bit of okay, so you want me to come back, but what am I coming back for? Am I coming back for, connections, collaborations? Does that all make sense? Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
totally. And it's funny that you're bringing. I mean, it's natural that you're bringing some of this stuff up. But I remember maybe even the last time I saw you, which is a shame, but it was, I think, this time last year at a Purposeful Intent event where I
Yes.
was hosting that roundtable about governance. It was all about ESG. We were talking about governance. And one of the things that kept coming up in those conversations was how somebody wants to feel aligned with the values of the leadership. And I think that it's hard to do that when the leadership is not sure or isn't making a clear strategy known and connecting emotionally the employees and those folks that are working in that, within that company, like part of those choices. And then, of course, going into some of the belonging. But so it's so interesting how kind of ambiguous that topic was a year ago. It's of course still this major area. And I think that I know that people are starting to talk about it more. And that was like the really like aha moment for me last year that wow, people really need this conversation because none of us really know. And I also think something that you talked about in one of our recent conversations was just kind of how some of these different business units that traditionally don't really maybe collaborate or make decisions together are starting to kind of need each other more, whether they're choosing to make the choices together or having that actual active collaboration. I'm not sure, you probably know better than me, but it's at least kind of we're identifying how much it's needed, whether it's HR and real estate and technology, of course, has been trying to come together for a long time. How are you seeing those dynamics? Talk about psychology. How are you seeing those dynamics play out?
Yeah, it's interesting because through the years when I was in real estate management at major corporations, I definitely saw that, real estate can't solve an HR problem. And now we have post-COVID HR trying to solve real estate problems, right? Because many of the functions are actually realigning to more the head of people. And the head of people is navigating it from what do my employees need? How do they, be more productive? And then at the same time, a lot of reorg is happening, where, individuals are burdened with more work, right? So, and that's leading to burnout. And then you're left holding a bag of like, okay, do we actually need more of the space? And if we do need the space, what type of spaces are actually the right setup? And then how do we actually surround people with the right services that is still within a cost framework that makes sense? And so it's a very complex, multi-layer problem.
Like
But I, yeah. But I'm optimistic, right? Because I'm an optimist by nature, because I do think that sometimes sort of necessity is the mother of invention, right? And we're in this interesting time of where if you look at, the people challenges and then you say, okay, what are some of the operational things that we need to change? Are there technologies that can actually make it easier, which you and I both know, given that we both dabble in prop tech, that there's a lot of tech that is being applied in a lot of different places that are not being applied in real estate. And there's got to be some sort of adoption that makes sense that will make it a better experience. And I think we're seeing a bit of that, with different companies right now. Even with the landlords, right? The landlords traditionally would have been like, that's the corporate's, challenges. They can spend the capital to do it. But now in order to compete for the fewer tenants that want that, better space, they are actually making those investments, which I think is a great time for the industry.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you touched on so many things just now. I think that I would love to hear more about some of like the services, like how people are making good business sense out of the choices that they are making, because there are a lot of choices. And, traditionally we're seeing, a lot of it comes first to like the multifamily industry. We see it in hotels and hospitality, but I think that it's starting to, we need it, but it's starting to unfold as really active implementations. So I think the main concern and the thing that holds people back, especially in this country, because we're very risk averse with our real estate and our portfolio choices, is what service do I choose? What's going to be the ROI? Like, where are my priorities? Because especially in some of these large cities like New York City, where you're sitting, where I'm from, you have a lot of kind of new priorities that the local governments are imposing on you to be more energy efficient, less carbon intensive, which thank goodness, but you have to really spread your priorities in a different kind of way. So what's the spread? Like what are people gravitating towards? What are they prioritizing?
Yeah, I certainly, especially in New York, but in many of the major cities where sustainability, road mapping and implementation is important. And largely the coastal cities. And then, there are certain cities like, Chicago and St. Louis and, cities that are really trying to do more around sustainability. There's the compliance piece, right? Going back to governance, but there is also the, how do we invest for the future to make sure that people want to be in our city? Right. And so, yeah, because people are voting with their feet. Right. Yeah. And so, what I find so fascinating is also more than ever, there's a lot more conversation between the public and the private, economic development, working with the private companies and the startups and the incubators to, really look at how do you actually create a competitive advantage. Right. And where this goes back to the well-being aspect of it is that, I think like year 2 of COVID, there was this whole buzz around like the 15-minute city, right? And we, that is really playing out, right? Because even when you talk to different folks in pockets of New York, what people will say is that, well, on the days that I am work from home, I pretty much stay within my neighborhood. I don't get on a subway unless I have to. And so they do everything they need to do within sort of a realm of walkable distance and commute that is not too burdensome, right? So cities really have to think about that. Whether you're New York or if you're, Albany or you're, some smaller city in a B or C market, they're having to make those choices because the interesting thing that COVID uncovered is that when people had different patterns and they were able to work from home, some of them are actually healthier, because they got to go to the gym. They were able to address, challenges in the past that might have been stressors, if they're stuck in a city and their family is at home an hour and a half away. Right. And so like having to really kind of look at that and say, how do you actually create from an urban planning perspective, communities that are actually impactful, where people feel good about where they live, where their kids are going to school, where they are able to get to work on days that they have to be in the office, that it's not overly burdensome and transportation and everything works. And then, on the days that I work from home, how do I infuse what healthiness in every one of those choices when I am living the life that I choose to live post-COVID? Right. And it used to be that people were willing to make those trade-offs. Now post-COVID, people are like, well, do I want to get a different job? Because absolutely. Yeah. I don't want to make those trade-offs anymore. Right. And so I think these are all factors that lead to a healthier outcome for communities, but also for companies and individuals. So companies need to be thinking about those things, right? Like, how do I now make different location strategy decisions, right, in partnership, with the communities that I chose to have a place?
I think it's just good business to have employees that have balance, that feel like they have balance, that feel a sense of satisfaction with their surroundings and flow of their week. I think that especially, being from New York and some of these other cities that we talk about, there's a mentality of needing to be productive 110% of your time. And even if you have a company, you work for a company that offers mental health services and a fitness facility, and they're bringing a masseuse to the office and food and beverage service and every possible thing that you could offer, they're offering. There's almost like a feeling of guilt to take advantage or to take 5 minutes to do that for yourself, or that day that you might work from home. It's like, oh no, if people aren't going to see me there, they're not going to think I'm productive. It's like, we need to be able to give permission. I keep saying this in this series, like as an industry, it's almost like we have this amazing power to give permission for people to create that balance. And I think it's only good business. I walked here today. I'm in an industrious downtown Fort Lauderdale. It's 10-minute walk from my home. I didn't have to be here at 9 a.m. or the first thing in the morning. I was able to walk at my leisure and beautiful. I mean, it's getting to be summer, so I try to avoid walking in midday.
Yeah.
But truly, like, there's nothing better than being able to like walk here, go downstairs. There's a great like farm to table restaurant, grab a juice between now and my next meeting, and meet some folks like around the space, whoever's here today. Like it makes me feel good to do my job today. And is that not just the goal of what we're doing? So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, they say that it's, people are more productive when they're surrounded by nature and when they have time to decompress, right? It's interesting, because when I also think about the belonging and, tying that to the work that I'm doing day to day, right? Our business is about promoting more, diverse suppliers in the commercial real estate industry. And so we do that not by being a matchmaker. We do that by being in the trenches with our firms, where we curate the teams and actually create a sense of belonging, performance. We, really look at, sort of who is the best company in the field that is, underrepresented, and we bring forward a process where we can include them in a proposal or in a bid that is at scale. And that belonging is really, really important, because you can't create a whole generation of more diverse suppliers without them feeling like they can be included in the bigger bids. Right. And these are things that, the flip side of the individual level from a belonging perspective is, if you look at the organizations, a lot of companies are trying to solve the belonging issue, whether it's at the individual level or trying to increase, diverse supplier participation. But there's no easy button to push. It's not an easy thing.
Feels like that intangible. It feels like somewhat of a gray area. You're talking about almost like an emotion. And for a long time, people have been struggling in our industry, but they know it's important. But they've been struggling to kind of understand how to emotionally connect somebody to a space, to a company, to a city. So it's cool that it's being talked about, but I think it's more than that. I do think there are people like you that are starting to put those pieces together and be kind of that glue, which is really cool. So yeah, keep talking to me about all.
Yeah, no, we're trying to, but we've had some good successes. I think that the interesting thing is that, going back to the employment is a two-way street, and people have choices, right? Whether they choose to, work an hour away commute or, closer to home. I do think that the same is the case for companies as well, right? So, I think we're in this interesting time of, sort of inclusion and belonging. Are there pushbacks around it? Are there areas that companies can continue to improve on, without necessarily being in a place where it's, becomes a PR issue? But at the same time, employees also are choosing companies, based on their values. Like, my oldest is about to graduate college, and he is, obviously a Gen Z. He is making choices in his employment that is distinctly different than when I was coming out of school. Back when I was coming out of school, it was get the best job you can, put in the hours, earn your keep, rise up the ranks. This newer generation that's entering are basically saying, I will not work for a company if their values are X, Y, and Z. And they're choosing differently. So, which is, good and bad. It's, it's good for that they're so clear, but it's bad for industries that are not really making progress around belonging and inclusion, right?
Been talking for 10 years about technology and innovation, which is really just not about the tech itself. It's about the understanding that we need to be creative to stay competitive, to evolve with how quickly culture is evolving by way of technology, which it is.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so it's no question that we're kind of finally at that place where it's, do or die. It's be there in the midst of how people want to experience. It's not even their job, because it's so much the job fitting into their life at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So, such a healthy way to think about it. I mean, good for your son, and good for this next generation for really asserting their values in this way, because the industry will move with them. We have to. And that's why we're having these
Yes.
conversations. Hopefully,
Yeah.
the more we have them, the more awake our industry can become. And I don't think it's that people don't want to be awake to these things. I think naturally we're an industry who realizes that we have to move with who's consuming our product.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think it's such a heavy lift to evolve at the pace that culture is evolving for an industry like ours. So I think it's that balance. How much do I invest in the design or the colors or the feeling of a space for it to only in 2 years from now need something totally different, right? Yeah, for this next generation to come in and say, nah, that's not how I feel about what I need from work. So it is that kind of balance and balancing in a way. You mentioned that you guys have seen a lot of successes, which is incredible. What are some of the kind of makeup of the companies that are finding that success? Is there like a trend? Is there a pattern?
So, what I find interesting is that for a long time, the industry will say, oh, find qualified, diverse firms. And that is so not true. We are seeing, firsthand caliber of companies that, whether it's through proposal efforts or through winning business together. There are firms that have been started by individuals that have come out of major companies, whether it's a major commercial real estate firm, or have worked as an end user, or, have been on project teams executing the same, hundreds of thousands and millions of square feet. And they happen to have, come out of the industry to bet on themselves and create a company for themselves. And, some of these companies are, have been around for a long time. I have one company that I have pursued business with on a couple of occasions already, and we won a 5-year contract together. This company is a Latina-owned project management company. The founder came out of one of the 3, legacy commercial real estate firms. They are a multi-million-dollar business, almost 10 years old. And we just submitted another proposal together yesterday that is, yet another not quite 5-year contract for a major company to do workplace transformation and project management. So that's an example, but we have a diverse range of companies that cover the full gamut. So folks that do consulting, whether it's workplace portfolio, process transformation. We also have diverse developers in our mix that are, managing ground up development or doing multifamily conversions in different parts of the country. We have folks that are actually, day to day are doing sustainability related work. And we've actually brought them into sustainability proposals. And in one instance, we won a 10-year state level contract for sustainability, where we're doing energy audits, energy benchmarking, road mapping, workforce development, and electrification design. In that instance, we actually brought together 3 different engineering firms and won 3 out of the 5 scope areas, for a state level contract. So those are 2 of the bigger ones, but there's in between, there's, different projects that we've done, that are all really interesting, and cut across full, gamut of different sectors. We've done academia work. We've done work for retail clients. We've done work for different brokerage assignments for, sort of smaller banks and nonprofits. So it really is the full gamut because you can't predict what the clients are ready and willing to buy. But if a client has a need for a particular type of service, then we're able to help lean in and make an introduction, but really set them up for success. And ultimately, that's really, the way in partnering with the entire industry is how we're going to actually move the needle.
So awesome. And I'm excited to see some of these things play out for you. And you're doing such great work. And I can tell that it builds you up when you talk about it. It's really nice to see. I want to talk about some of the kind of lowest hanging fruit. People are listening to this show, and I think that it can feel really overwhelming, especially if they haven't maybe taken the first steps towards, having, whether it's diversity in their team, in their stack, or even, creating a more kind of healthy feeling of belonging. Mm-hmm. What are things that somebody could do, a company could do, a building could do, some lowest hanging fruit?
Yeah, I think the industry has done a good job since COVID of framing, DEI priorities, right, across the board. Companies have done, ERGs, employee resource groups, where they're able to have affinity folks where, promote like events and acknowledging, different cultural practices that are important to people of different backgrounds. But I would say low hanging fruit, and this is at the individual level, is that going back to the inclusion and belonging, when you come across a colleague that has been hired that is not part of the majority demographic of the company, let's say it's a young practitioner that has come out of school who, happens to be from a diverse background, literally teaching them the ropes. Like that is as low hanging fruit as it gets. Like it's not hard to engage somebody in a conversation to find out where they're from, to actually understand why they're interested in the industry, and then to offer help and be a champion, right, within the organization. That is the most basic thing that anybody can do to actually make somebody who's new to the industry feel welcome. Seriously, I mean, it's more basic than that. If you had to do one thing, that's the only thing that will matter.
And I think, wherever somebody comes from, just anybody who wants to spend their talent in this industry, who's just starting out, I hope that people are welcoming them with open arms, because they're not, we're not in the majority in general of people who want to work in this industry. Like, we're not the majority of students that are coming out of college or, switching careers to commercial real estate. So if they're choosing to spend their talent, definitely, let's support them in any way that we can. We need that.
We do. Absolutely. The brightest minds. Yeah. Otherwise, they're, anybody with any kind of engineering background or, anybody with financial background, they could go work at a platform company. They could work at any of the quant hedge funds or, for them to actually choose this industry and actually get to a point where they know how interesting and how lucrative it can be, requires that they actually feel good about wanting to be part of this industry to begin with, right?
Help them figure out how lucrative and opportunistic we really have, what we have going on in this industry. And a lot of them are, the scope of what they're learning in school is primarily, it's very finance dominated. It's very investment focused. And so I think that a lot of these students, and I do a lot of mock interviews for, some of the universities coming into the real estate industry, they don't even understand what is available for them in this industry. They have such a broad, a narrow understanding of what we really have to offer. And so, and to no fault of their own, they've chosen great if they're choosing commercial real estate, but there's so much opportunity. And so as much as we can help them connect to those opportunities from an emotional way where they're excited to be pursuing this career, and also help them understand some of the historical context of how we got to where we are as an industry, some of the challenges that exist, so that they don't have to make some of those mistakes and they could really move in the right direction. That's everything. I love that answer. It's so good, really, because I certainly never felt connected to this industry, or like it was for me. I kind of feel very exclusionary, and I do think that the more people that champion whether they're from another industry and they're choosing to change careers, or they're coming to school, or they quit school and they're, pursuing this direction. I love that. Wow, you have such an interesting kind of, like I was saying before, like me, like we get to kind of see the industry from a bigger picture, which is so interesting. And I love that you say that, how optimistic you are, because I don't find that most people are, but it's such an important quality, especially in our industry, because it's very often that we're up against really negative media. I was doing the PR for commercial real estate. I don't know, but we need a new team. So I love how optimistic that you are. It's really refreshing. What are some of the things you're excited to see? Like, you get to see so much success happen, which is amazing. What are some of the things that like really get you excited for the future of the industry?
So I'm excited to see where the innovation comes from the constraints that we have today, right? So like, if you want to talk about the housing crisis throughout the country, right? And, the conversion and zoning variances and the potential of that, where it changes the fabric of the neighborhoods that we all, walk past. I'm excited to see what they do with that, because, cities are resilient. You look at New York, it's been around for a long time, and there's always been, ups and downs, right? I grew up in New York in the 80s. So I saw the boom and the bust, right? When you think about where, in the late 1970s, the high interest rate, the inflation, the crime, all the things that were going on in New York, and then the go-go 80s when everything just boomed, right? Yeah, and where Times Square became Disney, right? Like, when you've witnessed those types of cycles, right, and you think to yourself, as challenging as some things are around, how lending came to a grinding halt, capital is tough to come by, investment is hard to make decisions around, and yet you think, okay, there's still pockets of opportunities, right? If we do the redevelopment, with Port Authority, and then all the pockets of zoning variances, and then buildings that are starting to trade hands, so that asset conversions can happen. Those are exciting. You look at, how schools are rethinking the way they're housing, their students, throughout different pockets, and the viability of, campuses, for example. So one of the things that we worked on last year was advising a liberal arts college on how to monetize their excess land, right? And the consideration of that, where, schools that are struggling for enrollment, they want a different revenue stream. And, now suddenly they're open to entertaining development options on their campus, where it can be 55 plus, it can be assisted living. And the potential of that changing the fabric of, going back to healthy and inclusionary environments, where loneliness being an epidemic in our country and globally, right? Now, if you can marry college students and the need for learning with elder care, the need for a thriving community, and that's a 1 + 1 = 3, because people are able to then access the care and services that they have. And if you have a school that actually has a nursing program, a PA program, now they have a place to practice the services that they're going to do as part of their profession. Because if you have assisted living on campus, that becomes a thriving community that didn't exist before. Right. So I'm excited by these pockets of opportunity, because you can actually create something brand new that didn't happen before. And so, yeah, everybody can dwell around the noise around real estate is dead, office is dead, but at the end of the day, I view those as, okay, there are facts in the equation that we can't change. Now, where do we go forward from here?
Right. How do we play in this landscape? And I think, to your point earlier, like, this why it's so important as industry practitioners, people who have seen the cycles, to learn, to teach what we know, to give that kind of punched out perspective because I think like definitely this next gen, we've seen such an evolution of culture so quickly. We see how, a trend on TikTok something could be posted today, and by the end of the day, it's viral and it's changed something. The ripple effect is so grandiose. So it's almost hard to imagine. It's so interesting. I can imagine the psychology of like your son, for example, and his peers potentially thinking about commercial real estate, not that he is, but potentially thinking about entering our industry, and the long game of investment and the longer cycles and the patience and the optimism and the business savvy and innovation, all of that, the critical thinking, all of that it really takes to make it in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to help these young people be successful? Because these are not tools that are really natural to them in the way that they've been experiencing life so far. So, I mean, wow, like what a connection we really need to make to help them thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. But like to your point, you talk about the sort of the being viral on TikTok, like there's a whole other side. There's a reverse learning opportunity too, because the younger generation are the ones that are moving forward in a different way that we also need to learn from that, right? How do we market differently? How do we, in terms of like why somebody would want to choose a particular building, and how the next generation views, I call it the micro moments, right? Because, the attention span of the collective society has shrunken. And so how do you actually create micro moments that are actually compelling, whether it's talking about moments that matter when they come back into the office, or moments of engagement through technology, or moments of just pushing message out in a way that somebody can consume, get the essence of what's needed, and be able to move on with their day. There's so much that can be adopted if companies are willing to try it, right? And really kind of think through what that might look like. I can't say that. I mean, ultimately, there's definitely areas where the two have to come together somewhere in between, right? I don't think it's all going to be, TikTok generation, but I also don't think that the ways that we've been doing it for the last 20, 30 years is also the way either. I do think the melding of the two is where we need to go.
Beautifully said. I really couldn't agree more. I think that there's a learning to, work with how long it takes to put up a building, and, you may have to, program that building and the marketing 3 to 5 years in advance of it actually living and existing. But then there's a understanding of how we're programming that building for flexibility of a potential trend or potential, cultural shifts, and what those, what the direction of that might look like. So I think it's a very cool time. I'm equally optimistic, and I love talking to another optimist. It's rare to happen in general in life, but especially mine. So I love that. It is really exciting. And I also feel a lot of hope, and I see a lot of opportunities. So I'm glad we're on the same page about that. I want to just personally invite you to talk about anything that really you do to take care of your own health, or something in particular that you do to take care of your own. It's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do have long days and long commutes, but I will never turn down a good massage or hot yoga. I try to schedule those things in, make sure that I stick to it, because, going back to the, ability to perform, if you don't feel good physically, and you're not taking care of yourself, it's really hard to operate at a rhythm that it takes to grow a business. And so for me, those are some of the things. And of course, spending time with family. My kids are a source of joy, and then my COVID dog that I adopted, my Cavapoo, she yeah. At any down day, all you have to do is just look in her eyes and you're good. So
That's a the best.
yes, they are.
I do love a good hot yoga class. That sweat really makes you feel like you walk out vibrating, right? It's hard.
Yes. No, it's really hard, especially the summer months, and it gets even hotter down where you are. But
yeah, I can't do the hot yoga in Florida. I used to do it for many years and I loved it. There's something about sweating, and also just like doing something that's so difficult that you have no choice but to just be in yourself.
Yes.
Focus on your breath and your body and your balance. And if you are, have what they call monkey mind and you have too many things going on, you're not balancing. There's no way you're doing that pose or whatever it is. It's just not happening. So it really is like, I do think it builds a level of resilience, just in your day to day to be able to, like you said, like do your job, but also just be a human in life these days because
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the great thing about hot yoga is, and some people might think it's gross, but at the end of the day, you think to yourself, it's totally no judgment zone. It like literally is like everybody's there to do what they can do best, and you don't have to do it perfectly, and you do it in a way that is your best self at that moment, and you try your best. The best thing about it is that at the end of the day, even if you fall out of a pose or you had to stop doing it because you need to just have a moment, you get back up and you keep doing it. And that is such a, it's a pattern for life, right? Where, there's always a chance to try and do it better the next time.
True. Progress is not always linear, right? Some days you might get into that posture. I found that the days where I was kind of more tired and I wasn't able to think too much are the days I would be able to get into more postures, because it's like you almost like realize how much you hold yourself back. So the days you have a lot going on, sometimes you need it more and you perform well. And some days you're like, I feel amazing and I just can't do what I did yesterday. And that's
right.
You really do learn a lot from challenging yourself. I love that you do that. That's so cool. Really great.
Yeah. Well, it's the latest obsession. So
I love it. It's a great obsession. It's a healthy obsession. Listen, we have many things that we could choose to go down the rabbit hole. So hot yoga is certainly not a bad one to be explored.
Yeah.
This has been so much fun, Kay. I really, I love how many different corners of this industry we can talk about. And I hope that my audience will really seek you out to connect with you, because you're such a wealth of knowledge and you have so much to share. And I think that people can really learn a lot from you. So I'm excited to share this episode. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you having me, and I look forward to making other connections. And definitely next time we should, next time you're in New York, let me know. We'll grab a meal together. Yeah.